name is Stella Frost. I'm 32. She's independent because she's not really part of this family, my father muttered into his whiskey glass. And then, when my uncle asked what he meant, he looked straight at me and said it louder. I'm done pretending. She's not my daughter. 31 guests. Thanksgiving dinner. My grandmother's house. That was last November. My stepmother was already holding a tissue before he even opened his mouth. I didn't notice that detail until later. What I noticed was the silence. And then the chaos. A fork dropping. My 7-year-old cousin asking, "Why is Uncle Richard yelling?" 2 aunts standing up to clear plates because they didn't know what else to do. But what none of them knew, what my stepmother had spent 2 years making sure no one would ever find, was sitting inside a dusty shoebox in the hallway closet, 10 feet from where I sat. My grandmother had put it there before she died. She told me once, "Don't go looking for trouble. But if trouble comes to you, that's where your answer is." Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Now let me take you back 19 years, to the week my mother was buried, and the first time everything started to change. I was 13 when we buried my mother. Ovarian cancer. 8 months from diagnosis to funeral. I remember standing at the edge of the casket in a black dress my mother had picked out for my 8th grade dance because nobody thought to buy me something for a funeral. My father stood 3 feet to my left. He didn't reach for my hand. He didn't look at me. He stared at the coffin like it owed him something. My grandmother Eleanor was the one who held me. She pressed my head into her wool coat and whispered, "Breathe, sweetheart, just breathe." Her hands smelled like lavender and cold cream. I held on to her until the cemetery workers told us it was time to leave. 4 months later, my father brought a woman home. "This is Diane he said, "a friend from work." Diane had a daughter, Lauren, 9 years old, blonde curls, front teeth still coming in. She smiled at me like we were going to be best friends. My father picked Lauren up and carried her to the car. He hadn't carried me since I was 8. Within 6 weeks, Diane moved in. Within 8, my bedroom on the 2nd floor, the one with the window that looked out over the maple tree my mother planted, became Lauren's. "She's younger," Diane explained, folding Lauren's pink comforter onto my old bed. "She needs the sunlight." I moved to the basement. Concrete walls. 1 window at ceiling height. I taped my honor roll certificate next to the light switch because there was nowhere else to put it. My grandmother came to visit that October. She walked through the house slowly, looking at everything. When she saw the basement, she stood in the doorway for a long time. Then she looked at me and said, very quietly, "Remember, this is my house. Nobody's pushing you out of it." I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. I was 15 the first time I heard it. Late on a Tuesday, school project kept me up past 11. I padded upstairs for water and stopped at the kitchen doorway because the light was on, and Diane's voice was low, careful, the voice she used when she wanted something. "Have you ever really looked at her, Richard?" My father was sitting at the table, beer in front of him, tie still on. "She doesn't have your jaw. She doesn't have your eyes." Silence. Just the refrigerator humming. "Margaret was lonely those years you traveled for work. You were gone 3-4 weeks at a time. A woman gets lonely, Richard." My mother's name in Diane's mouth sounded wrong, like a stranger wearing her clothes. My father said nothing. He didn't defend my mother. He didn't defend me. He just sat there, peeling the label off his beer, and let the words settle into him like rain into dry soil. From that night on, he stopped looking me in the eyes. I didn't know why. I thought I'd done something. I thought maybe I reminded him too much of Mom, that seeing my face hurt him. So I tried harder. Cooked dinner 3 nights a week, kept my grades perfect, cleaned the kitchen without being asked, volunteered for every errand nobody wanted. None of it worked. And Diane kept planting. Not to me, never to my face. She whispered to aunts at cookouts, dropped hints at Christmas. Always indirect, always deniable. Richard's been having such a hard time. He looks at Stella and just shuts down. I try to help, but it's not my place. She never said the words out loud. She didn't have to. She built the story like weather. Slow, steady, impossible to point at, but impossible to ignore. That Christmas, Lauren had 12 gifts under the tree. I had one, a scarf. The tag said from Dad. But the handwriting was Diane's. When I was 18, I asked my father for help with college. We were on the porch, a Sunday. He was reading the paper. I'd rehearsed the conversation 6 times in the basement mirror. Dad, I got into the nursing program at UConn. I was wondering if— I'll think about it, he said. Didn't look up. 1 week later, Diane announced at dinner that Lauren would be attending Whitfield Academy, a private prep school 40 minutes north. Full tuition, uniforms, a new laptop for orientation. My father smiled at Lauren across the table. You're going to do great, kiddo. I never got an answer about UConn. The silence was the answer. I took out federal loans, worked the cafeteria morning shift and the library closing shift, studied in between. 4 years of nursing school, and my father called me 3 times. Each call was the same question. When are you graduating? Not because he wanted to attend, because Diane wanted to know when I'd be fully out of the house. Graduation day, May 2015. I walked across the stage in a white coat. My father wasn't there. He and Diane had flown to Florida for Lauren's high school graduation the same week. They chose hers. But in the 3rd row, dead center, clapping louder than anyone in the auditorium, my grandmother. Afterward, she took me to lunch. Grilled cheese and tomato soup at the diner she'd been going to for 40 years. She slid a small box across the table. Inside was a gold pendant necklace. Simple, delicate, warm from her pocket. This was your mother's, she said. Wear it close. I've worn it every day since. I didn't know then that there was a tiny folded note hidden inside the pendant's locket clasp. I wouldn't learn about that for another 4 years, when my grandmother sat me down and told me the truth about everything. My grandmother died on a Thursday in March, 2 years before the Thanksgiving that changed everything. I found out 2 days late. My phone rang Saturday morning, Aunt Ruth, voice shaking. Honey, Eleanor passed Thursday night, peacefully, in her sleep. When's the funeral? Silence. Then. It was yesterday, Stella. I drove 6 hours. When I got to the house, my grandmother's house, the one she'd lived in for 51 years, the one where 3 generations of Frosts had eaten Sunday dinners, the funeral flowers were already wilting on the porch. Diane opened the door. Oh, Stella, we tried to call. She hadn't tried. I asked to go into my grandmother's room, just to sit, just to be near her things. Diane stepped into the doorway. Not blocking, positioning. Eleanor's things are being sorted. We'll let you know if there's anything for you. I looked past her into the kitchen. On the counter, half hidden under a grocery circular, I saw a manila envelope. The return address read, Alderman and Associates, in dark blue type. A law office. Diane followed my gaze. Her hand moved, casual, practiced, and slid the envelope under a stack of mail. Like tidying up. Like nothing. When's the will being read? I asked. There's no formal reading, Diane said. Richard spoke with the lawyer. Eleanor left the house to him, that's all. Relatives filtered through that week. Nobody questioned it. Richard was the only son. It made sense. But driving home, I kept hearing my grandmother's voice from years ago, standing in that basement doorway. This is my house. I passed the hallway closet on my way out. My hand touched the doorknob, held it for a second. Then I let go. I thought my grandmother was gone. I thought whatever she'd been keeping didn't matter anymore. I was wrong about that too. I need to go back 3 years before my grandmother died, to 2019, to the day she told me the truth. My grandmother was 77 that year and sharp as a blade. She organized a family health screening. Heart disease ran deep in the Frost line. Her husband, my grandfather, had died of a massive coronary at 61. She wanted everyone tested. She booked a Saturday at Dr. Perkins' family practice. Richard came. I came. Aunt Ruth drove up from Hartford. A few cousins. We all gave blood and saliva samples for a cardiac risk panel. Richard signed his consent form between bites of a donut from the waiting room. Routine. Uneventful. 2 weeks later, my grandmother asked me to come to her house. Alone. She was sitting at her kitchen table with 2 cups of tea already poured. She looked at me the way she always did. Like she could see every version of me, 13 and 27 and 40, all at once. I've heard what Diane's been telling your father, she said. About your mother. About you. My stomach dropped. It's not true, Stella. None of it. Your mother was faithful, she was good, and I have proof. She told me she'd asked Hartford Genomics to run a paternity test from the health screening samples, mine and Richard's. I had given my sample willingly, and she'd requested the additional test with my knowledge now, sitting right here, asking for my consent. Do it, I said. I didn't hesitate. 3 weeks later, the result came back. Probability of paternity, 99.998%. My grandmother sealed the result in an envelope with a letter she'd already written. She put both inside a blue shoebox, along with a photocopy of a document I didn't fully understand yet. She told me where she was hiding it, behind her old shoes in the hallway closet. Don't go looking for trouble, she said, but if trouble comes to you, that's where your answer is. She wanted to confront Diane herself. She had a plan, but she wanted to wait for the right time. If we go to them now, Diane will spin it. She'll make your father choose, and right now, he'll choose her. My grandmother died before the right time came, and I kept my promise. I didn't open the box. I prayed I'd never have to. 3 weeks before last Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. That alone was strange. Lauren and I weren't close. We weren't enemies either, just two people who'd lived parallel lives in the same house without ever really knowing each other. She texted me maybe twice a year. Birthday, Christmas. That was it. Dad wants everyone there this year. Big dinner. He said to make sure you come. I read it 3 times. Something about the phrasing, make sure you come, sat wrong. It sounded less like an invitation and more like a summons. I called Aunt Ruth that evening. I got a strange text from Lauren, I said, about Thanksgiving. Ruth was quiet for a moment, then, I've been hearing things, Stella. Diane's been in Richard's ear more than usual, about you, about the house. What about the house? A friend of mine, Gail, the realtor over on Birch Street, told me Diane called her last week, asked her to come do a walkthrough, evaluation. My stomach went cold. She's trying to sell it. She's trying something, Ruth said. I sat on my apartment floor and stared at the wall. The pieces started clicking together. Diane wanted the house sold. But if my grandmother's codicil mentioned me, and I was starting to believe it did, then Diane needed me out of the picture first. Not legally, emotionally. She needed me so humiliated, so broken, that I'd never come back to claim anything. Eleanor told me about that box too, Ruth said quietly. She said if things got bad enough, I should remind you. I remember where it is. Then go to Thanksgiving, Stella. But go early. I almost said no. I almost stayed home and let them have their dinner and their lies. And Ruth? I'm coming too, she said. I wasn't invited, but I'm coming, because I promised your grandmother. Thanksgiving Day. I pulled into the driveway at 2:30, a full half-hour before guests were expected. The November air was sharp, and the house looked like a magazine cover. Diane had hired someone to hang garlands across the porch railing. White lights threaded through the boxwoods, a wreath on every window. It looked beautiful. It looked like a stage. I walked up the porch steps carrying a bottle of wine, like every year, simple burgundy knit dress, my grandmother's pendant against my collarbone, hair down, no armor except the truth I was praying I wouldn't need. Diane opened the door before I knocked. Stella, so glad you could make it, sweetie. She pulled me into a hug, held my shoulders a beat too long. Her smile was wide, but her eyes were scanning, checking me, reading me, the way she always did. Then she steered me left toward the kitchen. Come help me with the cranberry sauce. I looked right as we passed the hallway. The closet door, plain white, brass knob, was 8 steps away. I could see the edge of the shoe rack through the gap under the door. 8 steps. But Diane's hand was on my back, guiding me in the other direction. In the kitchen, caterers were plating appetizers. Diane had gone all out, chafing dishes, cloth napkins, real silver. This wasn't a family Thanksgiving. This was a production. I glanced through the kitchen doorway into the living room. Richard sat in the recliner by the window, staring at nothing. A glass of Maker's Mark in his hand, at 3 in the afternoon. "Hi, Dad." He turned his head, looked at me, something flickered, and then went out. "You came," he said. "Not, I'm glad. Not, you look nice. Just confirmation. Like checking a name off a list." Cars were pulling into the driveway, doors closing, voices on the porch. I hadn't reached the closet yet. By 3:15, the house was filling up. Cousins I hadn't seen in a year. Richard's golf buddies, Diane's friends from her book club. 2 women I'd never met, both overdressed, both laughing too loud at everything Diane said. I waited. At 3:20, Diane was deep in conversation with the caterer about the gravy boat. Lauren was in the dining room adjusting place cards. Richard hadn't moved from his chair. I wiped my hands on a dish towel. "Bathroom," I said to no one in particular. The hallway was empty. Just coats on hooks, the umbrella stand, and the closet at the far end. I walked normally, didn't rush. My pulse was in my throat. I opened the closet door. Winter coats, scarves on the top shelf, and on the floor, my grandmother's shoes, orthopedic flats in beige and navy, lined up neatly, untouched since she died. No one had cared enough to move them. I knelt and reached behind the back row. My fingers touched cardboard. Dusty, cool. The corner of a box. I pulled it out. Faded blue. A Nike logo half worn off the lid. It looked like nothing. An old shoebox that belonged in a donation pile. That was the point. My grandmother had hidden the most important thing in the most ordinary place. Something inside shifted when I tilted it. Light, paper, footsteps. Lauren appeared at the end of the hall. "Oh, hey Stella, you okay?" I slid the box back. "Yeah, just looking for a hanger for my coat." She nodded and moved on. I counted to 10, pulled the box out again. This time, I didn't put it back. I tucked it behind my grandmother's old winter coat, the long wool one that still hung on the far hook, still carrying a ghost of her lavender perfume. I closed the closet door and walked back to the kitchen. Diane looked up from the stove. "You were gone a while." "Line for the bathroom." She studied me for 1 second, then turned back to the turkey. My heart was hammering, but the box was safe. And I was praying, hard, that I'd never have to open it. At 4 o'clock, Diane called everyone to the table, and I saw what she'd done. Place cards, calligraphed, cream cardstock with little gold leaves pressed into the corners. She must have spent hours on them, or paid someone to. Richard was at the head, Diane on his right, Lauren on his left, in the seat that, in my grandmother's time, had always belonged to the eldest child. I found my name at the far end, wedged between 7-year-old cousin Oliver and a woman named Brenda, who turned out to be Diane's Pilates instructor. 32 place settings. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a courtroom, and the jury was already seated. Aunt Ruth arrived at 4:05. I heard the front door open and Diane's voice go sharp for exactly 1 second before resetting to hostess mode. "Ruth, what a surprise!" "I'm sure it is," Ruth said. She was already pulling a chair from the hall closet area and wedging it between 2 cousins near the middle of the table. Nobody argued. You didn't argue with Ruth Calloway. She was 78, 5'2", and had a gaze that could stop traffic. Richard stood to say grace. He cleared his throat and gripped the back of his chair. "This house has been in our family for 3 generations. Mom would have wanted us all here." He paused. His eyes moved down the table, passed over me, and kept going. "Everyone who belongs here." I felt Ruth's eyes on me from 6 chairs away. Under the table, Diane's hand moved to Richard's forearm. A small squeeze. A nod so slight you'd miss it if you weren't watching. I was watching. Richard reached for his glass, his 4th whiskey. It wasn't even 4:30. Pastor Thompson, seated to Diane's right, special guest, folded his hands and bowed his head. Everyone bowed theirs. I didn't. I was looking at the hallway closet door. The turkey was carved. Plates were full. The noise of 32 people eating and talking settled over the table like a warm fog. For 45 minutes, nothing happened. Diane told a long story about Lauren's promotion. Regional manager at 23, the youngest in her company's history. Everyone clapped. Richard beamed. Then someone's wife, Carol, I think, married to Cousin Dennis, turned to me from across the table. "What about you, Stella? How's the hospital?" Before I could answer, Diane leaned in, sweet, helpful. "Oh, Stella keeps to herself. She's always been independent." She said the word like it meant something else. "I'm fine, thank you," I said. "ER keeps me busy." The conversation moved on, for about 3 minutes. Uncle Gary, 2 beers deep, looked at my father from across the table. "Richard, you all right? You look like you've got something on your mind." My father stared at his plate. "I'm fine." Diane put her hand on his arm. She leaned close, but her whisper carried the way whispers do in quiet rooms, perfectly audible to anyone paying attention. "It's okay, honey. You don't have to carry it alone tonight." I felt my spine straighten. Ruth set her fork down. "Let the man eat in peace." Diane looked at Ruth the way a cat looks at a closed door. "Ruth, this is a family matter. I am family." 3 seconds of silence. The kind where everyone suddenly becomes very interested in their mashed potatoes. Then Richard picked up his whiskey glass and drained it. He set it down hard. The sound cut through the table noise like a gunshot. Every head turned. He pushed his chair back, and he stood up. My father stood at the head of the table with both hands flat on the wood, the way a man stands when he's trying to keep himself upright. Someone's wife said, "Richard, sit down. Have some pie." He didn't sit. "I've been carrying something a long time," he said. His voice was thick, unsteady, whiskey and 18 years of Diane's voice in his ear. "She's independent because she's not really part of this family." The words landed like a slap. Carol stopped chewing. Dennis put his fork down. "Uncle Gary." "What are you talking about, Rich?" My father looked at me, right at me, and I saw it. A flicker. Just for a half second. The father I remembered from before. The one who used to carry me on his shoulders through the apple orchard. His eyes were wet, and his jaw was tight. And I could see he knew, somewhere deep, that what he was about to say was wrong. He said it anyway. "I'm done pretending. She's not my daughter. Margaret wasn't faithful. I've known for years." The room cracked open. A fork hit a plate. Oliver, 7 years old, sitting right next to me, tugged his mother's sleeve. "Why is Uncle Richard yelling?" 2 of my aunts stood up simultaneously and started clearing dishes. Not because it was time, because they didn't know what else to do with their hands. Someone near the end of the table, I didn't see who, slid a phone out and held it low under the table, recording or texting. I didn't know which. Uncle Gary pushed back from the table and walked out to the porch without a word. Diane pressed a tissue to her eye, and I realized, looking back, putting the pieces together, she'd had that tissue in her hand before my father even stood up. She'd been holding it the entire time. I sat frozen. 10 seconds. 15. The longest silence of my life. My hands trembled in my lap. My eyes burned. The whole room was watching me, waiting for me to cry, to scream, to run. Then I felt it. The pendant. My grandmother's necklace, warm against my chest. I put my napkin on the table. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood, and in the silence, it sounded like a door opening. I stood up. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Steadier, too. Not because I was calm, because everything inside me had gone still the way the air goes still before a storm. "If we're being honest tonight, Dad, then let's all be honest." I stepped away from my chair. The room tracked me. 31 pairs of eyes, forks suspended, napkins frozen mid-dab. My shoes on the hardwood were the only sound. 1 step, 2 steps, past the empty chairs, past Cousin Dennis and his wife, past Diane's Pilates instructor, who was already reaching for her purse. "Stella, where are you going?" Diane's voice, still sweet, but underneath it, a hairline crack. I'd never heard that crack before. I didn't answer. The hallway closet was 10 steps away. I reached it in 8. I opened the door, and the smell of my grandmother hit me. Lavender and wool and the faint cedar of old shoe trees. I reached behind her winter coat. My fingers closed around the box. Dusty, light, ordinary. I held it against my chest and turned back toward the dining room. 31 faces, candlelight. The turkey half carved in the center of the table like some absurd centerpiece for the worst night of my life. Diane was standing now. What is that? No sweetness left. Her voice had gone flat, hard, and her eyes, fixed on the blue shoebox, went wide. She recognized it. I could see it. 2 years she'd spent searching this house after my grandmother died. Every drawer, every shelf, every closet. She'd found nothing because she'd been looking for something important, and my grandmother had hidden it inside something ordinary. Ruth spoke from her chair, voice low and even, the way she'd spoken to misbehaving students for 40 years. Diane, sit down. Diane didn't sit, but she didn't move forward either. I set the box on the table, between the cranberry sauce and the candles. I lifted the lid. On top, folded once, sealed in a clear plastic sleeve, a letter. My grandmother's handwriting. Shaky, unmistakable. Diane moved fast, not toward the box, toward the audience. She turned to the room with both palms up, tears already streaming. The performance was instant, seamless, like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror. This is exactly what I told Richard. She came here with a plan. Her voice climbed. She has been jealous of Lauren since day one. She can't stand that this family moved on without her. She pressed the tissue to her throat, a gesture of delicacy, of suffering. I have given 18 years to this family. 18 years. And this is what I get? A few people shifted in their seats. Brenda, the Pilates friend, nodded sympathetically. But most of the table was looking at the box, not at Diane. Maybe we should all just... one of my aunts started. I am calm, Diane snapped. The mask slipped for exactly 1 second. Then she caught it, softened her face, pressed the tissue back to her eye. Richard, still standing, his hand on the back of his chair like it was the only thing keeping him vertical. Stella, sit down. Don't make this worse. I looked at him, my father, the man who carried me through apple orchards, the man who let a stranger erase my mother from his memory. I'm not making anything worse, Dad. I'm not the one who started this tonight. Diane pointed at me. You see, she always turns everything into... Diane, hush. Ruth's voice cut through the room like a bell, not loud, just final. Let her talk. Oliver's mother scooped him up and carried him toward the living room. 2 of Diane's friends exchanged a glance. The room was shrinking, not in size, but in patience. I slid the letter out of its plastic sleeve, unfolded it. My grandmother's handwriting blurred for a second because my eyes were wet, and I blinked hard until it steadied. I began to read. Dear Stella. My voice cracked on her name. I swallowed, started again. Dear Stella. If you're reading this, it means things have gotten bad enough. I'm sorry I couldn't fix this while I was alive. I tried. But Diane is patient, and your father is weak. A sound came from the other end of the table. Someone, I think it was Aunt Carol, inhaled sharply. Your mother Margaret loved your father until the day she closed her eyes. She was faithful. She was good. The things Diane has been whispering about her. I heard them. All of them. I had to stop. Breathe. The words were my grandmother's. But the anger behind them was mine too. Anger for my mother, who couldn't defend herself. Who had been dead for 19 years and was still being called a liar by a woman who'd never met her. And I will not let a dead woman be slandered in her own home. Marcus, my cousin, leaned back in his chair and covered his mouth with his hand. In this box, I left what I could gather. Not for revenge, Stella. For the truth. Because the truth is the only thing that can't be taken from you. I set the letter down. My hands were trembling. The room was so quiet I could hear the candles flicker. Richard's voice, thin. Mom was confused at the end. She didn't know what she was... Ruth cut him off without raising her voice. Eleanor was sharper at 80 than most people in this room, Richard. Including you. Diane, arms crossed. An old woman's ramblings. This proves nothing. Ruth looked at me, steady, certain, the same way my grandmother used to look at me. There's more in that box, Stella. Keep going. I reached into the box and pulled out the second envelope. It was manila, yellowed at the edges. The Hartford Genomics logo was printed in the upper left corner. A double helix in blue ink, slightly faded. My grandmother's handwriting across the front. For the truth. Eleanor, 2019. In 2019, I said, my grandmother organized a family health screening. Heart disease runs in the Frosts. Grandpa died of a coronary at 61. She wanted everyone tested. I looked at my father. Dad, you gave a blood sample. So did I. We all signed consent forms at Dr. Perkins' office. Richard's brow furrowed. He remembered. Grandma asked the lab to run a paternity test from those same samples. She told me. I agreed. I opened the envelope, pulled out a single sheet, held it where the candlelight could catch it. Probability of paternity, I read. 99.998%. The room didn't gasp. That's a movie thing. What actually happened was worse. A slow, rolling silence, like the air being let out of something. Dennis leaned forward to see the paper. Carol's hand went to her chest. Marcus stood up from his chair, took 3 steps toward the window, and stopped, staring at nothing. I am your daughter, Dad. My voice didn't break this time. It was low and even and sadder than I wanted it to be. I have always been your daughter, Diane. That's... anyone can fake. Hartford Genomics, Ruth said from her seat, calm as stone. I drove Eleanor there myself. The lab stores samples. They have records. Call them, Diane. Call them right now. I set the paper on the table, face up, next to the cranberry sauce. This isn't a court document, I said, but it's from a certified lab with stored samples, and if anyone in this room has doubts, Dad, you can walk into any clinic tomorrow and we'll do it again. I'll pay. Nobody spoke. My father was staring at the paper like it was a mirror showing him something he didn't want to see. My father picked up the lab report. His hands shook so badly the paper rattled. He read it again. Then he set it down and looked at Diane. Not the way a husband looks at a wife. The way a man looks at a locked door he's just realized he built himself. You told me? His voice was barely a whisper. You told me she wasn't mine. Diane's chin lifted. Richard, I believed it. Margaret was my wife. The word came out of him like something torn loose. 2 of the aunts froze mid-step in the kitchen doorway, plates in hand. And Stella is my daughter, and I just... in front of everyone, He sat down, not deliberately. His legs just gave. He put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. I stood 6 feet away, close enough to touch him. Every instinct I'd built over 18 years, be good, be patient, go to him, make it easier, pulled at me like a current. My feet wanted to move. My arms wanted to reach out. I didn't move. For the first time in my life, I chose myself first. Lauren's chair scraped back. She stood without looking at anyone, walked to the front door, and disappeared onto the porch. The door clicked shut behind her. Diane was still standing, still performing. But the audience had turned. Richard, she's manipulating. Stop. One word. My father said it without lifting his head from his hands. One word aimed at the woman he'd chosen over me for 18 years. But sitting in that dining room, watching him crumble, I didn't feel victory. I felt the weight of all the years that word came too late. 18 years too late for one syllable. The candles flickered, the turkey sat untouched, and I still had one more thing in the box. I reached into the box one final time. The last item was a photocopied document, 4 pages, stapled at the corner, with my grandmother's handwriting in the margin. Original, at Alderman and Associates. This is a copy, I said. The original is with my grandmother's lawyer, but this is what she wanted everyone to know. I read the relevant section aloud. My voice was steady now, not because I wasn't shaking inside, because my grandmother's words deserved to be heard clearly. I, Eleanor Marie Frost, being of sound mind, hereby amend my last will and testament with the following codicil. I leave the family residence at 14 Maple Hill Road to my granddaughter, Stella Margaret Frost, in full and unconditional ownership. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." I didn't see who. The codicil states the reason, I continued. My son Richard has been unduly influenced in his decisions regarding his firstborn. I leave the family home to Stella to ensure she always has a place. Diane went white. Not red. White. The color left her face like water draining from a sink. That's not valid, she said. Richard told me Eleanor left everything to him. Ruth spoke, still seated, still calm. Because you hid the letters from the law office, Diane. Mr. Alderman sent 2 notification letters to this house. Neither one was answered. She paused. He told me himself. The room turned to Diane the way a weather vane turns in a shifting wind, not all at once but inevitably. Richard raised his head. His eyes were swollen. His voice was raw. You hid my mother's will? Diane grabbed her purse from the back of her chair. Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in 18 years, Diane Frost had nothing to say. Ruth's voice followed her to the door. You can leave, Diane, but the truth stays. Diane stopped in the doorway, purse clutched to her chest like a shield. She turned around one last time. I expected venom. What I got was something almost worse, a plea dressed up as indignation. You're all making a mistake. I gave the best years of my life to this family. Marcus, who had been standing by the window with his arms crossed since the DNA result, shook his head slowly. Diane, come on. 3 words, but the tiredness in his voice, the disappointment, carried more weight than any speech. One of my aunts picked up a serving dish and walked into the kitchen without looking at Diane. Another followed. Not dramatic, not confrontational, just done. The way Midwestern women end things, by quietly refusing to be in the same room. Diane looked at Richard. Are you coming? He was still in his chair, still holding the lab report. He didn't look up. I need a minute. Richard. He said nothing. Diane left. Her heels clicked down the front steps. A car door slammed. The engine turned over. Gravel crunched as she backed out of the driveway. And then it was quiet. 30 people in a dining room, candles burning low, food going cold. Nobody knew what to do next because there's no etiquette book for this, no chapter titled, What to Serve After Your Stepmother's Lies Collapse at the Dinner Table. Pastor Thompson folded his napkin neatly. I think the family could use some space, he said, and a few of Diane's friends and the golf buddies murmured agreement, collecting coats, saying soft goodbyes. I stepped out onto the porch for air, and that's where I found Lauren. She was sitting on the top step, elbows on her knees, staring at the driveway where her mother's taillights had just disappeared. She wasn't crying for Diane, I could tell. She was crying for the thing underneath, the realization that the life she'd been living, the family she thought she had been built on a foundation her mother had been pouring poison into for 18 years. And the foundation had just cracked. By 7 o'clock the house was nearly empty. A few relatives lingered in the kitchen, wrapping leftovers in foil, speaking in low voices. Ruth washed dishes at the sink like it was any other Thursday. Steady hands, warm water, no wasted movement. I sat on the bottom step of the staircase with my phone in my hand. I'd already dialed the number printed on the codicil's cover page. Gerald Alderman, attorney at law. It rang 4 times. Voicemail. An older man's voice, unhurried. You've reached the office of Gerald Alderman. We are closed for the holiday. Please leave a message and we will return your call on the next business day. I pressed the phone to my ear and tried to keep my voice even. Mr. Alderman, this is Stella Frost, Eleanor Frost's granddaughter. I found the box. I need to speak with you. Please call me back. I hung up, stared at the screen. Nothing. The confirmation would have to wait. Richard was still at the dining table, alone now. The place settings had been cleared around him, but he hadn't moved. He looked like a man sitting in the ruins of something he'd helped demolish. I walked past him toward the stairs. Stopped. I'm staying here tonight, Dad. In Grandma's room. We'll figure out the rest later. He looked up. His eyes were bloodshot and old. Older than 58. Stella, Not tonight, Dad. I gripped the banister. Not tonight. I climbed the stairs to my grandmother's room, opened the door. Lavender. The quilt she'd had since 1987. On the bedside table, a framed photo of my mother, young and laughing in the backyard garden. Diane had stripped every other photo of Margaret from this house, but she'd never entered this room. I lay on my grandmother's bed, held the empty blue shoebox against my chest. It had done its job. But I didn't sleep, not because of the silence, because of the question circling my head like a bird that wouldn't land. Why did it take 18 years and a piece of paper for my father to look at me? My phone rang at 8:14 the next morning. I was already awake. Hadn't really slept. The room was cold and gray, the way New England mornings are in late November. I picked up on the second ring. "Ms. Frost? This is Gerald Alderman. I received your message." His voice was warm, measured, the voice of a man who'd practiced law for 40 years and never once rushed through a sentence. "I've been expecting this call," he said. "Not today specifically, but eventually. Your grandmother told me it would come." I sat up, pulled the quilt around my shoulders. "Is it real? The codicil? Is it valid?" "It is. Eleanor executed it in my office on September 14th, 2020. 2 witnesses, both members of my staff, neither related to the family, notarized. She also signed a capacity declaration, and I personally documented her mental acuity at the time of signing." He paused. "I sent 2 notification letters to the house after her passing. Neither was returned. Neither was acknowledged. I suspected interference, but I had no proof until now." "Diane intercepted them," I said. "That's consistent with what I suspected, and it's something the probate court will take seriously." I exhaled. The air left my chest in a way that felt like something unclenching. "What do I do now?" "Come to my office Monday. We file the transfer through probate. It may take a few weeks, possibly a couple of months, but the documentation is thorough, Stella. Your grandmother made certain of that." I looked out the window, the backyard, my mother's garden, overgrown now, mostly dead stalks and bare soil. But the boxwood border she'd planted 25 years ago was still standing. "Thank you, Mr. Alderman." "Don't thank me." A pause, a softening. "Thank Eleanor. She did all the hard work." I hung up, set the phone on the quilt, pressed my palms against my eyes until the tears stopped. Then I went downstairs to make coffee, because the world keeps going, even after it breaks. 2 weeks later, this is what the wreckage looked like. Diane hired a lawyer. The lawyer reviewed the codicil, 2 independent witnesses, notarization, capacity declaration, county filing, and declined to take the case. There was nothing to contest. My grandmother had built her paperwork like a fortress. Diane called Pastor Thompson next, asked him to sit down with me and talk about forgiveness and family unity. Pastor Thompson told her, politely but clearly, "I was there, Diane. I think the person who needs guidance right now isn't Stella." In the church, the Whisper Network reversed direction. For 18 years, Diane had been the devoted second wife, the woman who saved Richard from his grief. Suddenly, people were remembering things, small moments, offhand comments, that looked different in the new light. She always did talk over Stella at potlucks. "Remember when she forgot to invite Stella to the Christmas pageant?" The same community that had nodded along to Diane's version for nearly 2 decades was now quietly, uncomfortably rewriting the story. My phone filled with messages. "Marcus, your grandma would be so proud." "Aunt Carol, I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." A few people stayed silent. I didn't blame them. It takes time to admit you were fooled. Alderman called with one more piece of information. The intercepted notification letters. Diane's refusal to respond to legal correspondence regarding the estate could be reported to the probate court. The court could sanction her, potentially bar her from any involvement in future estate proceedings. I chose not to pursue it. I wanted the house and the truth. That was enough. Then the pastor called me, privately, and he told me something I never expected to hear. 3 years ago, he said, your grandmother came to see me. She asked my opinion on writing a codicil, whether it was the right thing to do. What did you tell her? I told her to follow her conscience. And she sat in the chair you're probably sitting in right now and said, my granddaughter will need armor one day. This is the best I can forge. I pressed the phone against my forehead and cried for the first time since Thanksgiving. Lauren called on a Sunday, 3 weeks after Thanksgiving. I was at the kitchen table in my apartment, grading whether I could afford to take unpaid time off for the probate process, when her name appeared on my phone. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I picked up. Hey, Lauren. Hey. Her voice was small, younger than 23. Do you have a minute? I do. 4 seconds of silence. I let them pass. I I think I knew something was wrong. She said it slowly, like she was laying each word down on a surface and checking whether it would hold her weight. I just didn't want to look at it. I closed my laptop, gave her the silence she needed. I saw how Mom treated you. I saw Dad stop looking at you. And I just kept taking the good parts for myself, the room, the tuition, the seat at the table. Her breath hitched. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that it was between you and Dad. But that's not true, is it? No, I said. It's not. More silence. A sniffle. Mom keeps calling me. She says you stole the house, that Grandma Eleanor was senile, that you manipulated everyone. What do you think? The longest pause of the call. Then, very quietly, I think Grandma Eleanor was the only honest person in that house. I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't pile on either. She was 23, and the story she'd lived inside, the one where her mother was the hero and I was the difficult outsider, had collapsed. That kind of reckoning doesn't need advice. It needs space. I appreciate you saying that, Lauren. That took something. I don't know what happens now. I'm not going to tell you what to do about your mom. That's your road. But if you ever want to talk, just you and me, no sides, I'll pick up. Okay. Okay. We hung up. It was the shortest and most honest conversation we'd ever had. My father asked to meet at a coffee shop. Neutral ground. I agreed. He was already there when I arrived. Corner booth, untouched Americano, both hands wrapped around the mug like he was trying to warm himself from the inside. He looked 10 years older than he had at Thanksgiving. I went through old photos last night, he said, before I even sat down. You have my mother's eyes. You have Margaret's smile. He swallowed. How did I let myself forget that? I took off my coat, hung it on the hook, sat down across from him. You didn't forget, Dad. You chose to believe someone else. He flinched. Not dramatically, just a small contraction around the eyes, like sunlight hitting a wound. She started 6 months after the wedding, he said. Diane. She told me she'd found old messages in Margaret's phone. Said she didn't want to hurt me, but she thought I deserved to know. He stared into his coffee. Margaret was gone. She couldn't tell me it wasn't true. There it was. The cruelest part of Diane's entire strategy. She'd attacked someone who couldn't fight back. You could have done a DNA test any time in 18 years, Dad. $100, 3 days. I was afraid. You weren't afraid the answer would prove her right. I kept my voice level. I owed him that. You were afraid it would prove her wrong, because then you'd have to face what you did to me. The coffee shop hummed around us. A blender, a laugh. Normal life, carrying on. I'm sorry, Stella. I'm not ready to forgive you yet, Dad. Maybe someday. But not because you say sorry today, because you actually change. He nodded. He didn't argue. That was something. The house is mine now. Grandma made sure of it. I'm not selling it. I'm not kicking you out. I zipped my coat. But Diane's lies are not welcome in that house anymore. And if you want to be in my life, you have to earn it, starting now. I left money for both coffees on the table, walked to the door, didn't look back, not out of cruelty, out of self-preservation. Because if I'd turned around and seen him crying, I might have sat back down and started the whole cycle again. And I was done with that cycle. 1 month after Thanksgiving, the probate paperwork was moving. Alderman said everything was straightforward. A few more weeks, maybe 2 months, and the title transfer would be final. In the meantime, I'd started coming to the house on weekends, not to claim it, to remember it. I spent a Saturday cleaning my grandmother's room. In the closet, I found 3 shoeboxes, the ordinary kind, not the blue one, filled with photographs. Stella at 2, on Richard's shoulders at the county fair, Margaret in the garden, dirt on her knees, laughing at whoever was behind the camera, Eleanor holding me on graduation day, her face split into the widest grin I'd ever seen on her. I carried the photos downstairs. The living room wall, the one above the fireplace, was bare. Diane had replaced every family photo with her own choices years ago, landscapes, generic prints, nothing with a face. I hung Margaret's photo first, center of the wall. My mother, 30 years old, standing in the backyard with sunlight in her hair. Then Eleanor beside her. Two women who loved me when the world made it hard to. I called Ruth from the kitchen. Thank you, Aunt Ruth, for keeping your promise. Oh, hush. Her voice cracked anyway. She'd be so proud, sweetheart. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for Margaret, too. Richard was still in the house, sleeping on the ground floor. Stella's condition. Diane does not set foot in this home. He'd agreed without argument. He'd started seeing a therapist. Pastor Thompson had made the referral. Whether it would change anything, I didn't know. That was his road. I sat on the porch that evening. December cold. Hot tea. The same porch where my grandmother had sat for 51 years. In her nightstand drawer I'd found one last piece of paper. Not a legal document. Not evidence. Just a note in her handwriting. Stella, the house is just wood and walls. You are the home. Love, Grandma. I folded it up and put it in my wallet, behind my driver's license, where I could feel it every time I reached for something ordinary. I didn't win that night. There's no winning when your father calls you a stranger in front of your whole family. But I stopped losing. I stopped letting silence be mistaken for acceptance. I stopped letting someone else's lies define who I am. I stopped setting myself on fire to keep their house warm, and it turned out the house was mine all along. If you're listening to this and you recognize something, the favoritism, the whispers, the feeling of being erased inside your own family, I want you to know you're not crazy. It's real, and you don't have to earn the love you were owed from birth. My grandmother taught me that. Not with a lecture, not with a confrontation, with a blue shoebox hidden behind her old shoes, with a letter that defended my dead mother's honor, with the truth she was brave enough to save when I was too young to save it myself. Here's what I've learned, now that the dust has settled and I can see clearly. Time is not forgiveness. Forgiveness requires change. And boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks. You decide who gets the key. I still love my father. I'm learning whether I can forgive him. Some days I think yes. Some days I sit on my grandmother's porch and I'm 13 again, standing at a grave, and forgiveness feels like a foreign language. But I'm never again going to beg someone to love me back. This is my house now. 3 generations of Frost women held on to it. My grandmother, my mother, and now me. And for the first time in 18 years, I belong somewhere. If Stella's story reminded you of someone, or of yourself, drop a comment. I set my boundary. And if you think someone needs to hear this tonight, share it with them. There's another story waiting for you in the description, about a mother who showed up at her daughter's wedding with the truth nobody expected. I'll see you there.